Welcome to a Book a Day podcast. And as you know, this week I'm narrating the stories of Bible, what really happens there, from Adam and Eve to Moses, Noah, and on to we reach the Jesus. Now, previously, in the previous episodes, we talked about the story of Adam and Eve, the journey of Noah, the great flood, and then Moses was born, and then he was in Egypt, where the Israelites were held captive. They were kept as slaves by Pharaoh. And eventually they get released with the help of God, and Moses leads them towards their homeland, which is Israel. Now, let's come back to the story and see what happens next. So, it had been about a month since the Israelites left Egypt, and the journey to Israel was quite tough. And even in Israel at that time, there was just wilderness. Little food was there, and so people started complaining at some point that they said that we wish that Jehovah, the God, had killed us in Egypt so that we didn't have to see this day when we don't have any food. To this, Jehovah, the God, listens to them and says that I'm going to cause food to rain down from the skies. And this is what he does. And the next morning, when the Israelites wake up, they see white stuff that has fallen from the sky, and they ask, "What is it?" And to which Moses replies, "This is the food that Jehovah has given us to eat." It was called manna, and tasted like thin cakes made with honey. And as usual, it came with certain instructions from God that you were supposed to eat as much as you could eat at that point, but you are not supposed to preserve it for the next day. But once again, many people did not listen. And then what happens is, whatever they have preserved, the next day it begins to get rotten, it starts to stink. But then the God keeps helping them with the fresh food the next day, and that's how they spend the next few years or months in the wilderness. About 2 months after they had left Egypt, the Israelites, they come to Mount Sinai, which is also called Horeb. And this is the same place, by the way, where Jehovah spoke to Moses from the burning bush. So people camped there, they stayed there for a while, and as they were waiting, Moses climbs the mountain. Up there on the top of the mountain, he goes there and he meets Jehovah the God once again. And Jehovah tells Moses that he wants the Israelites to obey him and to become his special people, his chosen people. And when Moses goes down and talks to his people, he explains everything to them, what the God had said and what really lay ahead. Now, Jehovah, the God, does a strange thing. He makes the top of the mountain creates smoke there, and causes really loud thunder. And then he begins to speak to the people. He says, "I am Jehovah, your God, who brought you out of Egypt." And then he commands, "You must not worship any other gods except me." Then God gives the Israelites 9 more commandments or laws, which collectively came to be known as the 10 Commandments. We all know about that, especially people who are familiar with the Bible, the Old Testament, or even the New Testament. They know about these 10 Commandments. At that point, though, the people who heard that, they were really scared. They tell Moses, "You speak to us because we are afraid that if God speaks to us, then we may die." So then Jehovah talks to Moses instead and he says, "Come up to me in the mountain. I will give you two flat stones on which I have written the laws. And those are the laws that I want the people, my people, remember, to keep." So Moses again goes up into the mountain and for 40 days and nights he stays there. So then God himself writes down those 10 commandments, but these are the most important 10 commandments, but that does not mean they were the only laws to be followed by them. There were many more which were specifically referred to those Israelites. One of those laws were, it said, you must love Jehovah, your God, with your whole heart and your whole mind, your whole soul, and your whole strength. Another one said, you must love your neighbor as yourself. Later we find that Jesus Christ said that these two were the greatest laws that Jehovah gave to his people, the people of Israel. Just in case you're not familiar with the 10 commandments, let me briefly summarize them for you. What they said, the first one I just mentioned, that you shall not have no other gods, any other gods before me, Jehovah said to them. And then the other one said, the second one, that is, it said, you shall not make idols. Number 3 said, you shall not take the name of the Lord, that is Jehovah, in vain. The fourth one was to remember the Sabbath day and to keep it holy. The fifth one said, honor your father and your mother. Sixth one said, you shall not murder. Seventh one, you shall not commit adultery. Eighth says, you shall not steal. Ninth says, you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. And 10th one said, you shall not covet. So these were the 10 commandments that God gave to Moses, along with, as I said, many other laws that were supposed to be followed by the chosen people. Now, coming back to the story, when Moses stays up on the mountain for a long time, which was 40 days and nights, the people start wondering and they say, we do not know what has happened to Moses. So let's make a God to lead us out of this land. All right, Moses' brother Aaron says, take off your gold earrings and bring them to me. And when people follow his advice, Aaron melts them down and makes a golden calf. And the people say, this is our God now. This is really the God who led us out of Egypt. They start believing it. Then they have a big party and they start worshipping the golden calf. Now when Jehovah sees this, he gets really angry. And he says to Moses, hurry and go down. These people are acting really badly. They have forgotten my laws and are bowing down to a golden calf. Moses follows his advice. He hurries down the mountain. And when he gets close, this is what he sees. The people are singing and dancing around the golden calf. And Moses gets angry again. And he throws down the 2 flat stones with the laws on them. And they break into many pieces. He then takes the golden calf and melts it down. Then he grinds it into powder. And he's still furious. He knows the people have made a mistake. He's still furious and he's asking his men to take out their swords. The bad people who worship the golden calf, They must die. That's what Moses says. And so the men strike dead 3,000 people. And as horrible as that sound, that really happens. And following which, the rest of them, quite naturally, you would say, they start following Moses and start believing in Jehovah. Well, we talked about the commandments and the laws that God shared with Moses when he was up on Mount Sinai. Jehovah also told him how to build a kind of a temple, a place of a worship. He said that Moses should build it in such a way that it could easily be taken apart. In this way, the parts could be carried to another place and they can be put together again. So, when the Israelites moved from place to place in the wilderness, they carried this structure, this tent like structure with them. It was really a simple structure, a big tent, and inside it you would see a small room at the end of it, and then inside the small room there was a box or chest. This was called the Ark of the Covenant. It had two angels made of gold, one on each end, and God again wrote the Ten Commandments on two flat stones because the Moses had made that mistake by breaking the other ones. And these stones were also kept inside the Ark of the Covenant. Also, there was a jar of manna, that special food that was also kept inside it. Moses' brother Aaron is the one that Jehovah chooses to be the high priest there. He leads the people in worshipping Jehovah, and then his sons also become priests there. Then inside that tent there is a bigger room also. It is twice as big as the size of the small room, and then there was a box inside it, which is really the place where the altar, where the priests would burn some incense and smoke would come out of it. Then of course there was lampstand which had 7 lamps, and the other thing in the room was a table, and on it there were 12 loaves of bread. And in the yard there was a big bowl or basin which was filled with water. The priests used it for washing. Then there was also the big altar where the dead animals were burned as an offering to Jehovah. So animal sacrifice was pretty much going on there. And the tent was placed right in the middle of the camp, and the Israelites lived in their tents all around it. And obviously when they moved from place to place, they kept moving this place of worship with them as well. And the life goes on once again. It goes on for a long time, in fact. 216 years go by. And remember, Moses is still leading them, these Israelites, back to their homeland, the land of Canaan. And they are still in the wilderness. Now, at that time, in the land of Canaan, a lot of bad people, at least from the perspective of Moses or the Israelites, they used to live there. So what Moses does is he sends out 12 spies, and he instructs them that find out how many people live there in Canaan and how strong they are. Find out if the ground is good for growing things, and be sure to bring back some of the fruits from there. We just want to know about the place. So when the spies go there and come back, they tell Moses, it is really a fine country. And to prove it, they show Moses some of the fruits. And some of the spies also tell about people. They say that people who live there are big and strong, and will really get killed if we try to take the land by force. Now the Israelites are they get scared when they hear this. They start wondering once again if it's a mistake, whether it would have been better to stay in Egypt and die as a slave, and otherwise there's no point going back to their homeland to Israel and getting killed in the battle. But as this discussion is going on, among these 12 spies, only 10 were saying that they would get killed. Two of the spies, they had this trust in Jehovah, and they tried to calm down the people. Their names were Joshua and Caleb. They say, "Don't be afraid. Jehovah is with us. It'll be easy to take the land." But the people, the other Israelites, they don't listen. In fact, they get so angry they want to kill Joshua and Caleb. And when all this is going on, Jehovah gets very angry. And he tells Moses, "None of the people from 20 years of age or over will go into the land of Canaan. They have seen the miracles that I did in Egypt and in the wilderness, but still they don't trust me. So they will wander in the wilderness for 40 years until the last person dies. Only Joshua and Caleb will go into the land of Canaan." So that's quite a harsh punishment from God, as you can see. But again, that's how it happened. So very few of them are left now, but as you can see, those that were left, they were the believers, and they were then subsequently divided into different Israeli tribes. The rest of them, they were still in the wilderness, but remember, God was looking after them, and they were surviving there, although it was getting difficult for them to still believe and keep their hopes alive. But still, they did their best. During this time, Moses also, along with his brother Aaron, he visits them, he looks after them, and eventually they all regret the mistake they have made by not believing in God, and God forgives them. Now the Israelites were almost ready to go into the land of Canaan. But then in between also certain interesting things happen which I would like to share with you. Balak, the king of Moab, he was at that point afraid of Israelites and their intentions. So what he does is, he sends for a smart man named Balaam to come to curse the Israelites. Balak promises to give Balaam a lot of money. So Balaam gets on his donkey and starts on his way to see Balak. Now, Jehovah, the God, does not want Balaam to curse his people. So he sends an angel with a long sword to stand in the road to stop Balaam. Balaam can't really see the angel, but his donkey does. So the donkey keeps trying to turn away from the angel and finally just lies down on the ground because he can't really find the way. Balaam, looking at this, gets very angry and he beats his donkey with a stick. Then Jehovah causes Balaam to hear his donkey speak to him. "What have I done to you so that you should beat me?" asks the donkey. "What have you done? You have made me look like a fool," Balaam says. "But have I ever treated you like this before?" the donkey asks. "No," Balaam says. Then Jehovah lets Balaam see the angel with the sword standing on the road. And the angel says, "Why have you beaten your donkey? I have come to block your way because you should not be going to curse Israel. If your donkey had turned away from me, I would have struck you dead. But I would not have hurt your donkey." To which Balaam now listens and regrets, and he says, "I have sinned. I did not know that you were standing on the road." Now the angel lets Balaam go, and Balaam goes on to see Balak. Still, he he still goes on to make a mistake. He still tries to curse Israel, but instead Jehovah makes him bless Israel 3 times. So the cursing doesn't really work. On the other side of the story, in the Israelites' camp, what happens is Aaron dies, and Jehovah tells Moses, take Joshua and stand him in front of the priest and the people. And there before them all, tell everybody that Joshua is the new leader. Moses does just what Jehovah has told him to do, and as you can imagine, Joshua becomes the next leader. And then Jehovah tells Moses to climb high up to the top of Mount Nebo in the land of Moab. And from up there, Moses can see, he can look across the Jordan River and can see the beautiful land of Canaan. At that point, Jehovah says, this is the land that I promised to give to the children of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I have let you see it, but I will not let you go into it. And that was that. There, on top of Mount Nebo, Moses dies. He was 120 years of age. He was still strong. Everything was fine. But that was his time, and God had decided that. Now, the new leader, Joshua, takes them further. Now it's time for them to cross the Jordan River. And at that point, Jehovah tells his people through Joshua, he says that the priest should take the Ark of the Covenant and go ahead. When they put their feet into the waters of the Jordan River, then the waters will stop running. So that's what the priests do. They pick up the Ark of the Covenant and carry it ahead of the people. And when they come to the Jordan River, the priests step right into the water. And as soon as their feet touch the water begins to stop running. It's a miracle once again. And once again, it's a dry land. They can walk through it. The priests who are carrying the Ark of the Covenant go right out into the middle of the dry river, and behind them follow the Israelites. And when everyone has gone across, Jehovah tells Joshua to find 12 strong men and ask them to go into the river where the priests are standing with the Ark of the Covenant. There they were supposed to pick 12 stones and stack them where they would stay for that night. Then in the future, when their children would ask what these stones mean, they were supposed to tell those children that the miracle happened and the water stopped running when Jehovah's Ark of the Covenant crossed the Jordan. These stones would remind them of the miracle. So this is what they do now. And once they are out of that space, once again the river takes over. Now, once they have crossed the river, it was going to be a march into the city. And we are talking about Jericho here. And this is what Jehovah tells Joshua. He says, you and your fighting men are to march around the city and march around it once each day for 6 days. Carry the Ark of the Covenant with you. 7 priests should walk ahead of it and blow their horns. On the 7th day, you should march around the city 7 times, then give a long sound on the horns and have everyone shout with a great war cry, and the walls will fall down flat. And quite naturally, Joshua and his people, they do what Jehovah tells them. And while they march, everyone is silent, no one speaks a word. All that can be heard at that point is the sound of the horns and the marching feet. The enemies of those people, that in the people of Jericho in the city, they were terrified. They knew what was coming their way. Finally, on the seventh day, after marching around the city 7 times, the horns sound, the fighting men shout, and the walls fall as God had promised. And then at that point, God instructs, kill everyone in the city and burn it. Burn everything. Save only the silver, gold, copper, and iron, and give them to the treasury of Jehovah's tent. But remember, this was just one city, and there were many more cities in the land of Canaan. And when they get to hear about the news of this attack, they get ready to fight against the Israelites. And at that point, they think that they can easily win. But there were some people in certain cities that had this conviction that probably it was not a good idea to fight the Israelites, and instead it would be better to surrender to the will of God. So those people were spared, but not everyone, because not everyone was willing to surrender. And now the war really begins, and it goes on for a long time. There were so many kings, they were against the people of Israel. So it takes Joshua and his army about 6 years to defeat 31 kings in the land. And of course, God helped them along the way. Now, many years pass, and Joshua finally dies at the age of 110. As long as he was there and his friends were there, the people followed the God Jehovah quite sincerely. But when these folks die, the people start doing once again those corrupt things, and they get into trouble. But then there were some good people too, and as the tradition had it, there were prophets. In fact, there were, if you go by Hebrew Bible's tradition, there were female prophetess. They were there as well. So the tradition continued. On another note, when the Israelites, they got into trouble, every time they got into trouble, they would cry out to Jehovah. And Jehovah answered them by giving them brave leaders to help them. And they were the prophets. So Bible called them, these leaders, as judges. So Joshua was the first judge, and some of the other judges came after them. They were women too. And that's how the tradition continued. The leaders or the judges kept coming, and they kept guiding their people, and that's how the tradition continued for a long time. One of the interesting points in this whole story is about the Philistines, those people who used to live there, and they are considered bad people according to the Bible, and they kept fighting the Israelites. Now, it's almost impossible not to compare it with the present situation, although if you go by the present situation, the Israelis are on the one side and Palestinians on the other side, and a lot of Christians and Muslims, they support Palestinians. But if you just go rationally and look at these people, the God's chosen people, they were guided by God, and they took over the land. And Philistines, those people, they are considered bad there. And that's something interesting. That's the kind of justification many Israelis today would find from the Bible. That's really, really interesting when you see it from the political point of view. I know it's not a fair comparison to make here, but as I said, it's impossible not to make that comparison when you hear that name in the Bible, the people of Israel and the Philistines. Now, Let me tell a brief story about that. The Philistines, they were considered bad people. They had been fighting those Israeli men. And there was another Israeli man who was called Samson, and he was the mightiest of the warriors. He would even kill the wild animals like lions with his bare hands, and he had like mighty strength, and he had killed hundreds of Philistines. Later, at some point, Samson falls in love with a woman called Delilah. But somehow the Philistine leaders, they bribed Delilah some 1,100 pieces of silver if she tells them what makes Samson so strong. And Delilah is taken by them, and she agrees. And therefore she keeps asking Samson what is it that makes him really strong. And finally one day Samson shares his secret with her. He says that my hair have never been cut. From the time that I was born, God chose me to be a special servant of his. And if my hair was cut, I would lose all my strength. So when Delilah learns this, she caresses him, takes him onto his lap and puts him to sleep. Then she calls a man to come in and cut his hair. And when Samson wakes up, he's lost all his strength. The Philistines then come in and capture him. They put out both his eyes and make him their slave. Now one day the Philistines have a big party to worship their god, Dagon, and they bring Samson out of prison to make fun of him. In the meantime though, Samson's hair, they have grown again, and Samson now says to the boy who is leading him by his hand, he says, "Let me touch the pillars that hold this building." Then Samson prays to Jehovah for strength and takes hold of the pillars, and he cries out and destroys them. And then he cries out, "Let me die with the Philistines." There are 3,000 Philistines at the party, and when Samson bends himself against the pillars, the building collapses, everybody gets killed, including him, including everybody, every Philistine. So as you can see, the conflict is endless in that land. It has been going on for millennia. What happens though after this story? What happens in the lives of the Israelites? And how do they rule their kingdom? And how do we go from there all the way to the New Testament and Jesus Christ? We'll find out in the next few episodes. Stay tuned and keep following. Do not forget to subscribe. Thank you very much.